Good morning, pilgrims, and welcome back as we continue our pilgrimage in 1 Kings. We're in the 15th chapter, and I think we got through the 15th verse on Friday. We had Asa established as king of Judah at that time. His father was Abijam, who served for only 3 years, and Abijam was the son of Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon, who was the son of David. So we're talking about that southern kingdom in which God is preserving the line of David because of his promises to David. The preservation of David's line was not because of the righteousness of his lineage, of those who came after him, but because of that original promise that God had made to David. We learned that Abijam, the son of Rehoboam, was an evil king like his father Rehoboam. But Asa, we were told, did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He was a good king. He had the places of idol worship torn down. He had Maacah discredited and removed from her role as queen mother because of an idol that she had built that was, the text says, a disgusting idol. Asa had that idol burned, and Maacah now is out of the picture. The text tells us that he wasn't able to get rid of, the way it describes it, all the high places, meaning all the places of where idol worship was taking place. But no one in the history of Israel had been able to accomplish that. The last thing we talked about, I think, on Friday was that he had the treasures of the temple that he had won back dedicated to the Lord, and his own personal treasures dedicated to the Lord. And that's where we left it. We were ready for verse 16, but we're still talking about the reign of Asa. This would be David's great-grandson. So reading verse 16, now there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. So we know that Asa became king of Judah toward the end of Jeroboam's reign. Now we're going to be learning still in this chapter that Jeroboam's successor didn't last very long. The immediate successor of Jeroboam was his son Nadab. Baasha became king after Nadab in Israel. Now that's in the northern kingdom. And we're going to be hearing more about him also in a few verses later. But here in 16, what we're discovering is that between Asa and Baasha, there was enmity all the days that they were both reigning in their respective kingdoms. And Baasha is going to get more print than Nadab. So it's good that we know that. So moving on to verse 17. And Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah in order to prevent anyone from going out or coming in to Asa, king of Judah. Okay, historically, there's really no greater conflict than the conflict that begins to exist when the people of God compromise their devotion to the Lord. And that's what we see here. It's brother against brother, father against son, mother against daughter. Jesus said that was going to happen um, and the what happened in the Jewish community is just, it's heartbreaking to think of the persecution that has gone both ways. First from the Jews to the Christians, later from Christians to the Jews. Horrible atrocities on the parts of both of those groups of people. And to this very day, you can talk to Jewish groups who are just totally focused on the evil of what Christians have done to them as a people and as a religion, stemming from their rejection of Christ at the time of Christ's coming. You can talk to Christian groups who will do the same thing. One of the experiences I had when I first went to college was to be told by a world history professor that he didn't want to hear anything from anybody in that class who considered themselves to be Christian, because it was all a bunch of fairy tales that had resulted in more evil being committed in the world than any other single thing. And I know people today who would share that view, people that I've spent a fair amount of time with. And there is evidence to support that. It's interesting how many wars have been fought between groups that have identified themselves as Christian. It's going on right now. We don't see armed warfare, at least not in numbers big enough to report, I guess, in the United States between those groups, although we certainly do see verbal warfare between those groups. In other parts of the world, however, that armed conflict is manifesting itself. In verse 17, we see that sort of thing happening here between the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. In verse 16, we were told that the conflict existed. Now we're told in verse 17 that the king of Israel, Baasha, is fortifying cities that would be transition places from Israel into Judah and vice versa, in order to stop the travel between those two kingdoms. Apparently, Baasha had the same fear that Jeroboam had when he was king, which was that faithful people in the northern kingdom of Israel would want to emigrate to Judah, and that faithful people from Judah would be infiltrating Israel and trying to undermine the authority of the king. Remember, Israel, under its king, has openly and intentionally moved towards idolatry. The line we heard about Jeroboam was that he'd put God behind his back, that he turned his back on God completely. And we have enough historical evidence to support the notion that those who sought to be faithful to Yahweh moved in fairly significant numbers from Israel to Judah. Certainly that was true of priests from the tribe of Levi. We also had evidence back in chapter 13 of at least one prophet going from Judah into Israel, undermining the authority of the king by bringing a message directly from God that resulted in the tearing down of one of the primary altars in Israel of idolatry, and a condemnation of the king, and basically a message that the kingdom of Israel was evil. This faithful prophet was not permitted to eat or drink in the kingdom of Israel. So it Baasha's fear is well-founded, and he's fortifying Ramah to stop this travel back and forth. Fortifying it means that he'll use armed force to keep his people from going south, and he will use armed force to keep the Judean people from going north. So we move on to verses 18 through 22. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold which were left in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the treasuries of the king's house, and delivered them into the hand of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hazael, king of Aram, who lived in Damascus, saying, Let there be a treaty between you and me, as between my father and your father. Behold, I've sent you a present of silver and gold. Go, break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me. So Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel and conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel Beth Maacah, and all Chinneroth, besides all the land of Naphtali. And it came about when Baasha heard of it, that he ceased fortifying Ramah and remained in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation to all Judah. None was exempt, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had built. And King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Okay, so as we continue to read through 1st and 2nd Kings, we're going to encounter three characters from Syria, all referred to as Ben-Hadad. Hadad was a Syrian god of the sun. Ben denotes the son of. When it talks about Ben-Hadad, it's another way of saying the son of the sun god. Okay. Now it's hard to know here if the author intends Ben-Hadad to be used as a name or a title. It shows up that way throughout the books of Kings as Ben-Hadad. It's used as though it's a name, but it could be understood as speaking of the leader of Egypt as Pharaoh. Pharaoh did this or Pharaoh did that. Could be that Ben-Hadad did this or Ben-Hadad did that, or it may have been referred to as a name. We don't know for sure. But in either case, Ben-Hadad is always Syrian. He's not an Israelite. He's not a descendant of the folks who came out of Egypt. He is instead a pagan who would have opposed the taking of Canaan if he had been there at the time of Joshua. In verse 18, it talks about the silver and the gold which were left in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the treasuries of the king's house. Now, if you recall, the Egyptian king Shishak had taken all the silver and gold which were in the treasuries of the house of the Lord, the temple, and the house of the king. However, earlier in the reign of King Asa, there had been war with what 2nd Chronicles refers to as the Cushites. Now, we don't read about that here in 1 Kings, but we do read about it in the books of Chronicles. The Cushites were Ethiopians, And it was then believed and is still believed that much of the treasure that was taken by the Egyptians earlier had made their way to Ethiopia. The Ethiopian church still claims to have many of those treasures, including the Ark of the Covenant. So this silver and gold, which were in the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the house of the king, this silver and gold that Asa was able to, this is the silver and gold that it speaks of here in verse 18, is probably the silver and gold that Asa was able to take in his defeat of the Cushites early in his reign as king. Now that could have been a significant treasure. The text tells us that Asa took it and offered it through his servants to Ben-Hadad the Syrian. And his purpose in doing that was to have Ben-Hadad come up against Baasha, who is fortifying Ramah on the borders between Israel and Judah. Asa, in verse 19, wants Ben-Hadad to make a treaty with him. And in so doing, that would have broken Ben-Hadad's treaty with Baasha in Israel. Now, we're not told here about Ben-Hadad having made that treaty or why it was, but in wanting Ben-Hadad to make a treaty with him instead, he points out that he sent a lot of gold and a lot of silver in return for making this treaty with him and for breaking the treaty with Baasha. Now, we've already said that part of his purpose was to get Baasha to stop fortifying Ramah. It's actually even more than that. He's wanting Baasha to have to withdraw from the border of Judah and move his armies completely to a different part of the kingdom. What we see here is a man of God who is dealing with pagans to protect the border of the people of God. Now, I think it's safe to say at this point that Asa does not consider Baasha or the people of Israel to truly be people of God either. And the old idea of everybody in the north, everybody who is a descendant of the tribes of Israel being the chosen people, I don't think Asa is feeling much alliance as a result of that. In any case, in verse 20, we see that Ben-Hadad listened to Asa and sent his armies into northern Israel. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll talk about the results of that and what that means. Okay, we're out of time for today. So let's pray. Gracious God, as we come before you this morning, those of us who believe ourselves to have been adopted by you and to be part of your church find ourselves often being angry with and judging others who identify themselves the same way. And we see them as our enemies often, Lord, just as Asa saw Baasha and the northern tribes as his enemies. You tell us, though, Lord, in your word, in Romans, that our real enemies are the powers and the principalities that come against us. And the divisions in our church are real and oftentimes exist for reasons that should cause division. But those reasons have come about because we've not been wholly devoted to you. And we began to listen to the voices of the idols and the false gods and the world and our own inner iniquity. And what these chapters are telling us, Lord, what you are telling us, is that when we're not wholly devoted to you, that kind of conflict always results. And you're showing us that there's no conflict uglier, more damaging to you, to your purpose, to your people, than the conflict that results from our not being wholly devoted to you. God, grant that your Spirit will clean us like we would clean dung from a house. Make us wholly thine. Help us, Lord, to surrender our whole beings to you without reservation, as these words of yours teach. For the sake of your love, for the sake of your kingdom, for the sake of your purpose, because it is your kingdom and your power and your glory that is forever and ever. Amen. Well, friends, that's it for today. Good to have you along. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.